Okay, I know I say this every time, but honestly, so excited for you guys to hear this episode. We just chatted with Jasmine Bina of Exposure Therapy
Concept Bureau. She's the founder of
and Concept
two
Bureau.
companies. Yeah.
Yes,
Amazing brand
baller.
strategist, but like just an amazing thinker. Like I would say, like I think brand strategist kind of gets a vibe to it, but like this woman is thinking
Yeah,
about the way the world works, the way that brands work, the way that they interface with the world on a very, very, very macro level, and then on a very micro level, which is obviously my favorite thing. Like those two worlds
yes.
together, like I could talk all day. So we
It's
talked
like Christmas morning
about
for you.
it really was. And we talked about a favorite topic of yours.
Yes. So started with this article that she posted on LinkedIn that I immediately was like, this is amazing. Shared it to Chris because it just felt like it could have been one of us writing this and talking about this, since we wanted to bring her on and dive deeper into shame, one of our favorite
Yeah.
topics.
So we're going to talk about the reason why shame may be kind of the last frontier for brands and the last thing to tackle, and how it's not just about kind of unearthing kind of these taboo topics, but really sort of changing the story for consumers and how brands can really have a role in that. So it's a super fascinating talk. I can't wait for you all to listen and let us know what you think in the comments, if it's useful, interesting, and what topics you think shame should be addressed with.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, it's Chris.
And Kirsten.
Welcome to Good Thinking Weekly, the podcast where we discuss the best of the best in brands, marketing, and culture.
Thousands of people, top execs from the likes of Complex, Klaviyo, Walmart, Wall Street Journal, and LVMH tune in every single week.
We run a creative consultancy in Good Co, so we know what it takes to build a good brand.
Subscribe on YouTube, your favorite podcast app, and Good Thinking on Substack for more.
All right, let's dive in.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, guys, we are so excited to have Jasmine on this, on the pod. I'll see all of your LinkedIn posts, and they're always really inspiring, really insightful, really thoughtful. But this particular post, because it's on a topic that I'm super passionate about, Chris and I talk a lot about, we're both kind of constantly digging into it, and fascinated and trying to do work around it, I say personally and professionally. I think the way that, so it's around shame. And what really caught me was the way that you were able to articulate not just really kind of the big picture issue, and then kind of the larger cultural insight into that, and then how brands can really, step into the opportunity as I see it. So with that, if you want to dig a little bit more, could give us a little bit of an overview. We're fangirling you for sure. And we know, we've, LinkedIn stalked you, and I think you guys have chatted previously. But give us a little bit of your background, and then talk to us about the post.
So I am a brand strategist. I'm also calling myself a cultural futurist lately, because that's where our work has gone for our clients and a lot of our published writing as well, because we have studied culture for a number of years now, and that's where most of our work has gone, and also just most of our interests. So I have two companies. I have Concept Bureau, which is a strategy agency, and we work with clients on the brand strategy side, companies that need to like move the needle of culture in some dimension in order to win. So companies that need to either like prove markets or create new markets, companies that like need to change a behavior or a belief in order for people to convert. So they're very like culturally invested. Those are the clients that we take on. That's not for everybody, certainly, but that's the kind of work that we do. And then we also have a community for strategic thinkers, which is a bit more broad. Not just for strategists, but for people who are in advertising, creatives, social, all kinds of different domains, called exposure therapy. And that is all about exposing people to provocative ideas and insights at the edges of culture, so that they can start to form a mental model of where culture is headed, and that informs their work. And it's also kind of like it's a very very connective, very bonded community. I say it's for the intellectually isolated. When I say that, people get it right away, because I think if you feel intellectually isolated in your work or not. And I think that's why we've attracted so many people from like different fields and different walks of life all over the world too. So yeah, that's what I do. As far as the post you're talking about, so That actually is like not the first time I've written about that. I wrote an article at least 5 or 6 years ago now called Dirty, Ugly Shame Stories. And I wrote that because we were working in a lot of those kinds of industries. And we had a lot of clients like in finance and debt, in wellness, having to do with the body, things like that. And even then we were seeing, so our work is very like psychographically driven. So we do a ton of actually just like qualitative and quantitative research around like getting to people's belief systems and value systems and like the lies they tell themselves, the stories they pay money for, stuff like that. And I could see even then these categories were starting to actually really take hold and get real like VC funding. And you dig enough and like you're always going to hit shame in these categories. Like there's always like a shame belief at the bottom of almost anything having to do with the body. I don't care who you are. Nobody's connected to their bodies. We're all like disintermediated from our bodies at this point. Anything having to do with money, the whole idea of capitalism and stuff like that. I can talk about that more. Anything having to do with like illness, obviously sexuality, stuff like that, topics that you're familiar with. And so I wrote the piece to kind of explore that, but I revisited it. Even before this, I published an article in Adweek about moral static, which I think complicates this idea a bit more because in the last 5 or 6 years, these industries have started to grow up a little bit, right? So now we're seeing like, actually, I want to call them mature, but companies that are like further along, and they've solved a lot of the problems. They've solved access. They've solved like all kinds of technological advancements, like with GLP-1s, platform advancements, things like that. They've solved like channel challenges. Really, the only thing left is like the emotional piece. It's the shame. And I know these companies are meeting that kind of brick wall. And when I wrote about it for Adweek, I was talking about the fact that now what you have is like, we have a very morally charged culture that is so fueled by social media that has just gotten so insane. Everything is a moral conflation. Everything is a moral war. And people are coming to your brand with all this shit in their heads. And like, they have to sort through all that before they even convert. So yeah, it's your biggest problem. Like, I think it's the last thing that's left for these brands. That's why I wrote that.
That's a lot. I mean, yes. And
So good. Yes.
now how do we fix it? And I think one of the things that you wrote about is like changing the story. And that's what stood out to me is like, it's not just about normalizing it for people. Cause I think, at least in the sexual health space is like, oh, sex is normal or periods or menopause or all of this stuff. And I still would say that menopause is one of those spaces that to me, like no one has quite changed the story.
No.
Like they're 100% like, oh, everybody has menopause. So we're all in the like, everybody has menopause phase, which is wonderful.
Wow.
And an advancement, maybe. I do think it's a small advancement.
It definitely
But
is.
like, how do you change, like, how would you change the story around that? Is I think the hard piece,
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question. There are lots of little incremental things that you can do. I think the biggest thing that we have always seen, and this comes like not from us, like you could see it in like social sciences or psychology or whatever. These are like really big cultural scripts. Like they're things that like you're born into and you kind of can't even think outside of them. And they're very synonymous with identity. So like if you're a fat person, like I was for most of my life, that's all you are. Like you cannot be anything else and you can't think outside of that. When we did research in debt, like I said, we work with so many financial brands and debt comes up a lot. And there are real solutions that people will not take because their judgment is so emotionally clouded because of these scripts. When you are in debt, that is all you are. You are in debt. You don't go to family functions. You don't do your hobbies. You don't volunteer at your kids' school because for some reason, well, I'll tell you why. I mean, this might be going into detail a little bit, but like, this is very US. Like it's, in the US, you have this whole like capitalistic idea. And I hate to say like every problem comes back to capitalism. I try really hard not to do that. But like, the story of like true capitalism tells us like it's a free market. And so if you get rich, you deserve it because you worked hard, you provided value and you did it. And that's, you deserve that. But then it also implies that the opposite is true, that if you cannot hack it, and if you are poor, you also deserve that because it's a free market. You have the same thing everybody else has. Of course, that's the fallacy, right? You don't always have the same thing that everybody else has. And there's a lot of bias and corruption, all that stuff in the markets. So like, how do you even get outside of these mental models? And here's the thing, you cannot, like you said, Chris, you're like so on point. You can't just be like, oh, that's not true. Like it doesn't do enough. You literally have to create a new identity for people to step into. So like people need to see a different version of themselves that they can actually believe and buy into, and then adopt that identity. And it's hard one. It takes a long time. It's slow, and it takes consistency and money. But I think like one brand that did this really well, even though they had other problems, was like MedMen, right? So like you, up until that point, if you had tracked all of the cannabis brands that were coming out, because the legislation has changed and you could, use it in California and other places, it was still always asking for permission in their ads and their campaigns and in their brand messaging. It was always like, almost like they would always go with the illness route. Like if you're depressed or if you're sad or if you have PTSD, like you deserve this. But MedMen came out with this big campaign. I forget what it was called, but like you would see these giant posters of like, you know what I'm talking about? Like the teacher.
Yes,
it would
I love that campaign.
Cross out the word stoner and write teacher, or like construction worker or whatever. And they gave you a new story where like you weren't like a failing of society. You were actually a pillar of the community. Like that was the new identity. I thought that was quite smart. It's too bad that like they failed for so many other reasons, but like
they failed for a lot of other reasons.
But that was smart. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a great point. And I think menopause, again, like personally and professionally, I'm fascinated by this. And it's such an opportunity. And I speak to, and I think we're saying the same thing. It's like, it's not just about, I think what you wrote, and I think it's absolutely true. They're telling like a new version of kind of the old story. But if somebody really does it as empowering, not like it's okay, and we can now say vagina in a meeting and all of these things, but it's really about like, no, this is going to completely rewire your brain and you're going to be the best version of yourself ever. Like nobody's saying that. And like, if anybody's saying that, we're all going to be like, yes, please, I'll take that.
100%.
Chinese medicine. But
what's that?
Chinese medicine is saying that, but like,
Fair. Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
The only place I see that is with personal brands. So people like Dr. Mary Claire Haver or, her
she's
whole
amazing.
cohort, like they are very much taking it from like, God, this weird, I'm pretty sure biblical story we're all born into, in that like you're meant to suffer and lose these 10 years of your life. And you're meant to like, basically disappear and become like a crone or whatever. And rewriting it. And it's more about like, actually, you will find yourself for the first time ever. And you will discover who you are. And you'll be the smartest you've ever been, and the most powerful you've ever been, and the most magnetic you've ever been. That's such an intoxicating story. And you kind of, there are other constellation brands and industries that are kind of like feeding into this a little bit. Like, I love what Dipsy did in the beginning. I like the whole romantic. I talk about romanticy ad nauseum because I feel like I see like something promising, like this whole like cinematic universe of like women that are like, it's not sex, it's power. Anyways, it's such an opportunity, and I don't see it in HRT, and there's such a need for it too. I mean, I'm also like, I've also been converted. I totally know that like all of the medical injustices and all of the whatever that brought us to this point, and it'll take time to unwind those. But you're right, like it's just right there for the taking. But people need a new identity. You can't just be like medical activism and like women have been shortchanged. No, it has to go beyond that, to be more about like, this is a different version of womanhood that you've never even been afforded before.
Yeah. And so
yes to that.
I've been thinking a lot about this, like in terms of like, what are the industry, because I think this is like, we're in like whatever is happening in the universe, like we're in a great unveiling of like all of these things. Like everyone's like, what is the next thing that we could talk about that makes everybody deeply uncomfortable? Like death, I think, is such an interesting one. I think death is a really interesting one. Like the whole story around that. I think dads are like deeply in this space, like going through whatever they're going through. What are the ones that you feel are like coming out of the woodwork right now, that you're like, oh, a news story is about to unfold? It hasn't quite come yet. Big question.
I don't know. Okay, this is like a niche example, but I love what brands like MindBloom are doing, the at-home ketamine therapy, because I see something there that I don't even see with other wellness brands that like play in like the more like extreme space. And that like, so first of all, like their branding is amazing, and they're a small team and they're doing amazing work. But like they're turning this, they're not even talking about like, yes, they talk about mental health. They talk about anxiety and trauma and depression and like have mountains of research that they fund and publish every year. But like, if you look at their ads, if you look at the way they talk about themselves, it's like transcendental, it's spiritual, and it's a really generative brand. Like they're always playing with new ideas. Like now after you do treatment, you can like talk into their app and like this AI will generate like a visual of like the experience you just had. It's taking mental health, and I feel like they're not even talking about illness anymore. I feel like they're talking about like higher levels of being almost.
Hmm.
And like uncovering a true version of yourself that you didn't even know existed. That's quite exciting. And I feel like they're almost leapfrogging the mental health conversation. Like it gets you there, but like maybe that's not why you stay there.
Right.
I think like that's one of the more provocative things I've seen.
Love that example.
Yes, I'm here for that for sure.
She's like, ayahuasca, who cares? Ketamine
Like
therapy, here I come.
we buy a lot of the same things, the three of us probably.
Yes.
On the same retreats.
Yes. I think it's like, what's the becoming the best version of yourself, and what are those tools? What are those industries? What are those kind of, products?
This is very much in the ether right now. I think I have a piece coming out about this. Like, I think that we've just gone through so much change. None of it has been metabolized. We know we're not who we were, but we do not know who we are yet. And so people are just playing and they are trying things out. And sometimes I feel like they're misapplied. Like should wellness culture be nearly a near religious experience? It could be. I don't know if you want to rest your entire identity on that, but like there's this openness to like figuring out who and what we are that I think is an exciting time for brands. I understand it's scary for a lot. Like it's kind, this whole like dark mode mask off era, which has a really dark side too, which has like all of the kind of like stuff we're seeing like in extreme politics and things like that can be terrifying. It also it goes both ways. It creates permissions all around for people to reinvent themselves and to rethink who they are. Destabilizing, yeah, but also holds tremendous promise for like what we can create out of it. To get super abstract.
Yes.
Sorry, Chris, where do you go from there?
No. I was like, we could go deep on that one.
Yes.
But I was thinking a little bit about like, just thinking about like sort of like the possibility, and obviously it would be near impossible to have a conversation about possibility today without talking about AI. And you were like, oh, it'll outlive us and it will outlive AI and like it'll be here. And like, what do you think? Like, I think a lot about the training of AI and the training of shame that is like already deeply like in existence, like regardless of what we do now. What do you think are sort of some of the things that like, if you're playing in that space, like what's some of the awareness you need to have around that?
So you mean like shame outliving all of this stuff? Yeah.
Well, shame like being embedded in AI, like in existence. Like,
I get that.
I think it's trained into it based on everything that we've written about for the last, 50, 60, 70 years that it's trained on. So how are we going to, it basically like all the shame that we had until now. So maybe anything new coming is like got a moment to shine, but like anything that we haven't addressed thus far, like what do you think is going to happen there? Like, do you think that there's an opportunity for training of AI to actually improve shame, or do you think it's more likely that it will perpetuate it?
Well, in its current forms, I can see how a lot of cultural conditioning that's just out in the world is obviously embedded in the training models because that's what it's been trained on. Absolutely. But I don't think we even know what use case for AI is really just going to take off. Like right now we're using it to like, I was just in a meeting with therapy members, like we're using it to write our LinkedIn posts, or like we're using it to like, help us do competitive research or whatever. And companies are just starting to use it for like, internal intel. Yeah. And people are using it for bigger things, like you said, like therapy or whatever. I think that's where I would just be a little careful, because that's what I meant earlier. Like, be careful where you place like your meaning making. Like, I don't know that these things are meant to do that for people, or meant to like give people what they need necessarily. Just like, I don't think you can find all of the meaning you need in like the wellness movement necessarily. But to answer your question, like on a bigger scale, sometimes I even wonder, how we're going to look back on these conversations. Because sometimes I wonder if like millennials were just like the test generation and Gen Z is going to laugh at us and be like, oh my God, how could they even think these things were, what they were? How could they, like, the same way like our parents fell prey to like misinformation in Facebook posts. We were
Yes.
not like sophisticated enough to know its place and keep it in its place. So I'm hopeful that like we'll start to see that. And yeah, we're just like I'm also extremely optimistic about where it can take us and all the problems it can solve. But I think it's yet to be seen like how gullible we are. And also like I have a suspicion like our generation is just a blip. Like I think people after us will know how to use it more responsibly and use it the right way. And this might not even be the main use case for AI. It might be something else. I hope that was useful in terms of an answer.
Yeah.
All answers are useful. I think all insight is useful. I think, like you said, I think people are really figuring it out. Like it feels like it's early days, but then everyone like it feels like there's nothing else, like we're in this funny phase where we're like in this in between where we're like, oh my God, it's taking over the world. But meanwhile, like it really hasn't taken over the world.
Yeah, exactly. Like life continues, it might, but I don't know that we've seen how it's going to do that yet.
No, yeah.
Right.
And I think it will do a lot of positive things. All right. I have to ask you about you wrote another post, and like I said, I could literally name like 20 posts, 40 posts that you've written and be like, let's talk about this all day.
Yes.
But you wrote a post that I reference a lot, where you said something along the lines, and I'm going to paraphrase it so you can correct me if I'm misinterpreting it. But you wrote something about the fact that like we talk a lot in trends about like pendulum swings, and like Matt Klein talks about it and everybody in the world talks about it, like how there are obviously like many things happening at the same time, and often things are happening that are the opposite to one another, to simplify it. And you said something along the lines of like, we're entering a phase, and I think we've been entering this phase for a while, but it's more pronounced now, where these two pendulum swings might live within inside one person.
Yeah.
Do you want to unpack that a little bit, and then we can talk about how it might relate to shame? Because I think that there could be both.
So, I wrote about that at the end of last year, and I was talking about how, things are about to get weird. They are getting weird, where like stuff doesn't make sense, right? Like you used to be able to like just put people in clean binaries. That may have been a false binary, but you knew if somebody looked like this, they were probably a Republican, or if they looked like that, they were probably a feminist. But you can't say that anymore. Like that changed. Like I can't point at somebody like, I mean, what does a person like that look like anymore? I read a fantastic article by a researcher whose name I really wish I could remember, but he was talking about how you can't even like classify people by how they work because we're all free agents now. Uber driver thinks he's a free agent the same way your doctor thinks he's a free agent. So like we're all kind of overlapping and we're all holding these contradictions within ourselves. That I think a lot of that was the algorithm. And I'm glad that we're untethering from that, because we would think like, the algorithm really encourages you to self-select for the binary so that you fit into a loop, you get into an echo chamber, you get the likes. And it's just not the way humans are. And I think we forgot that. And then we had this huge like political rupture with the election. And all of a sudden people were like, wait, what? And they kind of had to wake up to the fact that actually people have always had contradictions. And it's part of what makes them human. And for a lot of people, it gives them meaning. It's like the whole trad wife, being the breadwinner kind of like, people have a problem with that because it doesn't fit neatly into their like little boxes of the world. Which is problematic to be like, we should not be looking at people that way. It's not a useful way to understand people. And I am seeing it in shame-based stuff too. So like, and I think it's good. I think it had to happen. So like I follow influencers on the far edge extreme of wellness. Because it's just so instrumental to my work. And I think if you're studying culture at all, a lot of culture is kind of generated from there. And, I see influencers now who are just like so about purity of body and mind slowly seed the conversation of like, I might take HRT, like, don't judge me. Like, you don't get to judge me. And like, it's funny because they were inadvertently profiting off of that shame before. Like they wouldn't say it out loud, but they knew that people were paying for their content because they wanted to believe like, this is the right way. Natural is the right way. How dare you try to go outside of the confines of what natural is supposed to be? But now that they are in a different life stage, like I've seen this with a couple of the influencers I follow. I'm like, well, that's interesting. But you know what? I'll take it. I'm glad that you're having to face the fact that you don't fit into a binary either. Like,
and you don't have to suffer even if you feel one way about something
yeah.
and not
And now
entirely
you
about
don't
it
get to,
another way.
yeah. And you don't get to now perpetuate that suffering on other people either. Like now, like you
Amen.
can't be that. Yeah. You can't be the totally clean, natural influencer anymore. That's like, it has to be this way. Because that's the problem. I feel we've become so tolerant to nuances that kind of got us into this mess. So anything that complicates the narrative, you know, generally I know that's a bit scary, but it's clearly the moment that we're going through. And so like I see it unwinding some of the shame stories that we see in our culture right now.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fascinating, but I think it's so needed in culture because we need people to be able to change their minds and learn new things and evolve and not be like, no, this is the only way. It's only this. We need that in politics. We need that in culture. We need that in society. We need that in menopause. We need that in wellness and all the things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You are 100% right. That was so well said. Talking about politics, people, I'm not the one to say this, but like I've heard other people say like, why is it seen as a weakness when a politician changes their mind because they have new information? When did that become okay? It's so insidious to the way things have evolved in this country. I don't really have an answer for why that's happened. I think it's happened over a long time, over a couple of generations. But you're right. It just locks us into these weird systems that don't let us grow or evolve.
Right. Because what do we tell our kids? It's okay. Oh, you don't like strawberries today? Okay. Well, maybe in 6 months you'll try them and maybe you will. Like, and that's okay. Not like, no, you're never going to eat strawberry. It's
You're
like
totally
the
right.
opposite of what we're living.
Isn't it so weird that like you teach your kids like the literal opposite of like what you encounter every day? I think about that all the time.
I do too.
Yeah. But that again is also related to shame, right? Like they don't want to be seen as like they were incorrect and that they didn't like know everything that there was to know about this one topic. And I think that again is like so much of the problem, right? Like if you are just perpetuating this like a lie, maybe you don't know it's a lie, maybe you believe it, like whatever. And then you're like, oh no, wait a second. Like I thought about this, I read something, I learned something, and then they are in the place of shame, right? They can't move forward. And I think businesses are equally as like susceptible to this. Like I think, Facebook is certainly like in this place probably. And I think like, it's interesting. Like I was watching Klarna, who like went full hog AI, like no more employees, and they actually made this announcement where they were like, hey, no, we're pulling this back. It's not working. Like we're in debt, like everything. But like that takes a lot, it's like you could look at it and be like, oh, like make fun of them, but at least like they're coming out and saying like, hey, actually, maybe some of these decisions didn't work, and like we're going to, or HBO, at least they make fun of themselves for coming back.
But such a great point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's nailing something. Go ahead, Jasmine.
I was just going to say, I totally agree. And that's another positive thing about a culture like this. It also forgets quickly and kind of, we love the whole rise and fall narrative of brands and celebrities and things like that. So like, yeah, you'll be torn down, but you can always, your audience will let you build yourself back up again too. Like there's always I kind of feel like it's a script you have to go through. Like if you fail, you have to let yourself kind of like be, I don't know, like a pariah or an archetype or whatever. And then, you can have your comeback story too. Like there's room for that. Like maybe that's just what evolution looks like in this culture. You have to kind of like
hero's journey
down and play.
Yeah. You just have to fire the CMO and then start over and like nothing. It's all their fault. And like, who cares?
It's the hero's journey though, right? But what I think's interesting and what Chris was talking about is it's kind of this shame piece, right? But then when you can access it through vulnerability, which I think is now okay in business, and we welcome it if done in the right way and done really truly transparent and with honest vulnerability, then you actually feel more connected to that brand. Then I think you're going to get more fans of that particular brand if you do it. I wouldn't suggest anybody script it in that way, but I think we're seeing that. And I think there's an unlocking of vulnerability in shame. And I think that's fascinating.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that's like what the promise is in all of it. I mean, all of it requires some healing, right? Like shame implies that there's got to be some healing involved. So I think we see that kind of like in the pattern of brands, like you just described, for sure.
And what is, in your experience, we spend a lot of time, I joke that half of the work we do is therapy work and then half the work is branding. And what in your experience is the sort of best way, like, do you find that brands are approaching you from a place where they're like, hey, we know we have this problem and we want to tackle it, whether that's culturally or whether it's in themselves, like something that they know that they need to address? Or do you think that you're like kind of uncovering that in the work that you're doing? What's kind of more common?
You know, luckily we get clients that are already so like they were being culturally fluent and embedded is in their DNA. So they're pretty self-aware when they come to us. But usually there is just more to kind of unearth before we can find like the real path forward for the brand. And that's more on like the audience side. But no, I think luckily we've been able to work with brands that are willing to take like a clear, honest look at their hand in creating whatever problem is that they've created and how they need to undo it. Now, whether they execute the solution completely, that could take a lot longer than you expect, or it takes a lot more like internal culture change and things like that. But we work with the C-suite, and I can say like, luckily, for the most part, we work with, I think, pretty enlightened executives. I think you kind of have to be if you're going to be in that space anyways. I don't think you get into that role. It's just so like emotionally and like intellectually demanding anyways. If you're like the Nikes of the world or whatever, where like you have to have that cultural sensitivity to begin with if you're going to even get to that spot.
Yeah. Let's hope. All right. Anything else, Kirsten? I know you have 1,000 questions because
I mean, I could talk about this all day. I could talk about all the things all day with you, honestly. Anything else we should hit on, or should we move on to rapid fire, quick fire?
Yeah, I told her she's not allowed to call it rapid fire anymore because that's like too assault weapon-y.
But rapid fire is, I mean, it's a generational thing. It has to be. It's like, you know, I've stopped referring to things as 411 because like that for sure dates me. But like quick fire,
I mean, I don't read it like
off the tongue.
I don't read it like that, but I mean, I'm not the masses, so I don't know.
Yeah, we could call it quick fire. It sounds more like cooking.
Sure.
Which again is not really my forte. So, okay. What's the biggest conversation you don't think is being had right now?
Well, related to what we were talking about, like, I think there's like a whole generation of people that are like reclaiming lost years. Like menopause can be like a dark 10 years. And I have a whole generation of women who will not have to go through that. Like that's 10 years of productivity and being a part of society. That will have huge downstream effects, I think. People on GLP-1, same thing. You know, I talk about this. When you're obese, you disappear yourself. Nobody even has to do it for you. And the idea of like all these people like coming back into the world, letting themselves be fully in the world, that's huge. I think that will have effects. And then the other thing that I've been thinking about, but I don't have like a full thesis yet, is there seems to be this like veil of gambling. This is totally unrelated, but like this veil of gambling kind of just like taking over a lot of our interfaces where like everything's turning into like you can bet on it.
Betting on society.
Yeah. Yeah. Gambling mechanic or something. And I don't know what that means yet, but that's something else I've been thinking about.
Ooh, that's a big one. Yeah, I think about that a lot, like how that desensitizes people to like outcomes in a way that is so fascinating, and the outcomes of that will be massive.
100%.
What's your biggest thing you think a brand should be doing differently as compared to 2 years ago?
I can't say for all brands. I would say for the brands that people like me work with, like I think you could maybe get away with vibes a couple years ago. There was still a lot of like social media real estate that was like up for grabs, but now everything's so fragmented and so noisy that I think you got to kind of go back towards meaning making again. And also there is something in the air where people are looking for meaning. There is just like, there is like spark of electricity where like people are kind of like looking for deeper systems, myth making, world building, whatever you want to call it. I think that will likely have to be the direction. It'll be a more viable direction than like vibes, I think, over the next few years.
Favorite Substack or podcast?
So Ross Barkin has a Substack called Political Currents. And I have been really over the last couple of years, you know, we do so much cultural research and everything is so interconnected now that like we look at all kinds of fields and domains, and politics has been a new one for me, or like geopolitics. And like, I think I always made the mistake of thinking that politics was upstream from culture, like political decisions change culture, but it's downstream. culture decides the politics of our time. That was kind of like a big oversight on my part. His political currents is like a remarkable Substack where like it brings in sociology and psychology and a deep understanding of humans and also business and markets. And I just really like the way he writes. And then another one that's not a Substack, it's a Patreon, is Peter Zeihan. He's a geopolitical analyst too. Like I pay for his Patreon just to show up at his quarterly calls where he like explains the world to you in an hour. And like they also just give me like, in this work, you can get very anxious when you have to like swallow all of culture all the time. And he gives you like good perspective where like, okay, yeah, maybe things aren't great, but at least I can understand the edges of all of this. It's not like an abyss so much. So yeah.
I love that.
I maybe need that. I need less abyss.
What's one new tool that you use that everyone should know about?
I mean, I don't know that I have like a fantastic tool. I did log in recently to Pocket and got the notice that they're shutting it down after like literally years of me just pouring every link that mattered into it. So I'm so upset. So somebody in exposure therapy mentioned MindBloom, and I've been using it and I love it. It's like a much, much smarter version of Pocket. That's way more visually useful too. Like you can actually see the information you collect, not just like see links. So that's been cool.
Oh, what's it called?
MindBloom.
I
downloaded it, but now I'll obviously use it.
It's not going to change your life, but it's good.
Okay.
Great. And what niche brand is crushing it right now?
I don't know that they're niche. It's funny. The more I do this work, the less I'm impressed by like brands in general. But like one brand that like I just fell in love with is a high luxury brand in India called Sabyasachi, which they have a flagship store in New York. I think they have another one in England, but they're growing. It is like high luxury. And what I love about it is if you learn a little bit about it, first of all, this stuff is gorgeous. So it's like couture. The founder like really got big through the whole bridal industry, but it's like boho maximalism, like way out there, jewels and brocade and all this stuff. But it's the way he tells his story, and he talks about how this was the birthplace of luxury, and he speaks to the diaspora, and he says like, this is your culture too. You can come home to this. You own a piece of this luxury ideal. And I felt that as a person in the Iranian or the Persian diaspora. And I wish somebody would make that for my culture. Because it's just very moving. Like this, like it gives a dimension to heritage that like you would never find in like, I don't know, the other like European houses, right? Like it's just so like emotionally captivating. And then like the extraness and the richness and like the craftsmanship of what he makes. I'm going to be in New York next month, and that's the first stop. I'm going to go into that store. I cannot wait to see like that stuff in real life. But I love that brand. Like it's just luxury on a different level.
I love that.
Maybe we'll have to check it out when we're in London, Kirsten.
Yeah.
You should. You should.
Yeah, I'm convinced. And Kirsten's like, maximalism? Tell me more.
I know. Heartfelt maximalism? Tell me less. I'm in.
She's like, is this my new being? Am I going to be dressed in this head to death?
So when I come back, it'll be,
No, I think
if they could just make like a J. Crew version of that for you, you'd be like, what is that?
See.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Well, I've met you before, so it's not just nice to meet you, but it's nice to chat. And like, yeah, unsurprisingly, you gave us so much to think about, and we really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it's really kind of you. And thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great talking.
It was great. Thank you.
That was it for this episode of Good Thinking. Don't forget to tune in next week.
If you found this valuable, subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast app.
And don't forget to read on Substack for even more insights.
And if you really liked it, drop us a heart. We'd love to hear from you.
Ciao. Until next time.